up our last group of speakers, if you will, and I'm particularly excited about hearing a little bit from Mike and Dan and Karin about their involvement in this conversation. Yeah, thanks, Jim. Their involvement in this conversation, what inspired them? Oh, thank you. What inspired them to get involved? Each of them kind of have a different story about why they are here, what they're trying to do, but most importantly, why the rest of the folks in this room should step up and get involved as well. So I'm going to let you all kind of run the show here, and then if there's a little bit of time and if folks have additional questions, we'll leave that open, but we'll toss it to who took the short straw. Who wants to go first here? Okay, Mike, I love it.
All right. Boy, this is a great attempt. I mean, I'm really excited to see this many people here to kind of get up to speed on these issues because you can tell they're very complex and they have a huge impact on our community. So first of all, I started working, I was actually president of Metropolitan Affordable Housing about 25 years ago now almost, and that's Cornerstone Community Housing. And back then, 25 years ago, we had a huge demand for affordable housing in our community. And we were working to solve that. And here we are 25 years later, and our affordable housing situation is worse than it's ever been. The funding for affordable housing is limited, and it's highly regulatory and competitive. And so one of the things coming out of here today is we've got to get more money into affordable housing. Affordable housing providers, they deal with the same zoning, regulatory, and neighborhood associations that normal developers deal with. And then they also have a lot of additional state and federal regulations. And so all that adds up to affordable housing costing about 20% more than it does for normal housing. So if you think about that, and Jacob, is it 20 or 25? I'm not sure what the number is. But so just because of regulatory issues and all the hoops that they have to jump through, same apartment building, exact same apartment building, 20% more expensive. So that's a lot of money. And about 2 years ago plus, I got involved with the chamber, and I started reading a lot of reports. As you know, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, they've spent billions of dollars on this homeless situation, and they're finding that their homeless counts are not going down, and in fact, the homeless counts are going up. And in fact, if you saw that one slide in Lane County, in the HMIS data, we've got over 10% more people than we had a year ago today. So, and as was mentioned before, we have one of the highest homeless rates on a per capita basis in the United States. That's a big problem for our community. And again, you heard we're short thousands of affordable housing units. So it's just not a few hundred, it's thousands. I think Jacob mentioned that we need at least 1,500 in the pipeline per year to even get close. So, and our homeless crisis affects everybody in our community. The police department, the fire department, the parks department, our ER rooms. I'd like to know how many of the ER visits at the University District were homeless related. So this problem is too big for us to not do anything. The other thing I want to make sure people understand is this is not a short-term problem. This problem we haven't built housing. We've been short of building housing in our community for 20 or 30 years, and it's going to take 10 to 20 years if we get after it right now to fill our housing pipeline, which means our homeless problem is not going to go away. You know, this is a long-term problem, and so we need to start thinking about long-term solutions for this problem. Sorry, I kind of blew up I was rethinking what I was going to say as everybody was going through their talks today. But the other thing is, so, and this really concerns me, is, you know, we had troubles meeting our city budget this year, and I think we were short $15 million, and we spread it across several agencies to take care of it. But with our homeless crisis, every year, every budget cycle, we're going to be strained, and we're going to be cutting back on other different agencies in our community to fund our housing issues. Now, you saw the costs, and we've got a $20 to $30 million hole of one-time funding that we're going to start missing pretty soon. And we know that our homeless population is continuing to climb. So, the bottom line for me is that we've really got to get together as a community and plan for this. I call it a crisis because in my mind it is a crisis. So, we're going to need some strong leadership over the next few years to work our way out of this. And I would not, it's going to be a difficult 5 years, I think, for us to get going. So I think as far as the business community goes, I think we've got to make sure that we're stepping in and that we've got really strong leadership in this area and that we're supporting our city and county leaders on, decisions that they're going to make to kind of help it get us out. Because there's going to be some tough decisions here. We've prided ourselves with our land use planning in Oregon for years, and in Eugene we've got land use planning code, and we've got overlays over the code, and we've got regulations. So, in order to get this housing built, we're going to have to figure out ways to get through some of these issues. So, I think that's about it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Karin Knutson. I got involved because, as our keynote said earlier, kicking things off, our housing market is a mess. And I am an architect and an educator and also a parent. And I think I saw that mess from a unique perspective. And in being here with you all today, I guess one of my asks of you would be to think about the unique perspective that you bring to understanding this challenge we face as a community, and to think about what particular skills and talents or resources that you have that you could bring to bear in helping us to address this crisis, because it will take several years. I'm not willing to go out to 20, but I'll go out a couple of years for sure, to address a challenge and a crisis that we have spent many years walking into and not really seeing the forest for the trees. I'll also say that in why I got involved and thinking about the particular perspective I was coming to in this work at that time, so 2016 is really when I started to get very involved in working on our housing crisis and the homelessness crisis that is a part of that. I saw and heard from a lot of people the concerns that were in the community, the frustration people felt, the sadness that people felt, the heartbreak that goes along with a structural crisis like the one that we face. And it felt like also what was needed was the aligning of some of those vectors of energy. You could think about this sort of a physics problem. And that's the work that took me into my work over this last 6 years as a housing advocate and led to the creation of Better Housing Together, which is an independent nonprofit, but also the hub of a collective impact model based here in Lane County. Many of our partners in this room, including the Chamber, which has been a part of this work from the very beginning. And the mission of Better Housing Together is to work collaboratively to increase housing affordability, diversity, and supply in Lane County. And as our partners would ask about, what do we have to do to be involved? And we now 50 local businesses and organizations, transpartisan, multidisciplinary, across all aspects of our community. The ask that we made of them was to agree to work toward that mission, to work collaboratively to increase housing affordability, diversity, and supply. And it sounds really easy, but the first thing we were asked to do was tackle Eugene's work to create our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And that right out of the gates for a brand new organizational effort was a great test of whether or not we could work collaboratively, that we could continue to center data and facts and make the space for shared understanding and connection among people who might not have spent a lot of time working together to address our housing crisis. That was what we did. And that was the beginning of my being very intensively involved in this work. A collective impact effort, and you all have heard this term, some of you might know it quite well. What's important to understand about it is the reason to structure an engagement using that type of model begins with understanding that the challenge is far too great for any one area of expertise to address. That it's actually not possible for just one gorilla, doesn't matter which one, to tackle the whole problem. It needs everyone working on the problem and putting their energies towards that. In the process of doing that work over this past 6 years, so Better Housing Together has worked on, as I mentioned, the creation of the City of Eugene's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That was a component, a diversified fund that is now funded by both a line item within our city budget that puts funds towards the creation of affordable housing, critical, and the construction excise tax that is in place in our community. So it's a diversified fund that will help for that resource to be continuous in our community through sort of hot economies and lulls, right? You can't only fund your response for affordable housing with something that's only available when a lot of things are being built. We also worked on Lane County's first affordable housing action plan, and we've worked very intensively over the past couple of years to do some of that restructuring of our regulatory environment to allow for us to build the solutions that we need. And that's the City of Eugene's, City of Springfield's middle housing codes, those new ordinances that allow us to build more affordability by design, allow for us to create a wider diversity of housing types through our typical production processes with as little complexity as possible, which means those are going to be the lowest cost units possible coming into the market. And a huge part of the top of that triangle that Eco Northwest showed earlier about the market components and contributions to this challenge. What we learned through doing that work is that when we take the time to focus, that we take the time to make space for agreement and for shared progress, we can accomplish remarkable things in our community. We have done things in the past 6 years that many people had said were absolutely impossible. I'm an architect and urban designer. I've been told for at least 20 years that single-family only zoning is it for America. That's what we've decided we want sometime in the middle of the 20th century. It's not what is our most traditional housing types in this country, but it was what was decided, and so that was that, and just don't bother thinking about it anymore. What we've seen Oregon do and what we've seen Eugene do is lead nationally in a conversation about housing affordability and diversity and supply being an integrated concern. In terms of takeaways, and I just saw Liz Kaywood here, and this came immediately to mind. Better Housing Together had originally had a steering committee, now has a board as a nonprofit, has an incredible group of partners. But very early when we were starting this work, we were talking about a large community gathering. And what was most important for the 300 people in that room to take out the door with them. And I remember a very specific exchange with Liz where I said quite offhandedly, I think what's most important is that we all feel that progress is possible. And Liz, as you know, zeroed in, that's it. Progress is possible. That's what people need to always understand as we are tackling these very large challenges, that we need to be strategic, we need to hold ourselves accountable, we need to focus on effectiveness, we need to be compassionate with each other, and certainly with the people who are experiencing the greatest harm within this crisis. But we absolutely can make progress. It is possible for us to do that when we align our efforts and work collaboratively towards the same end. So thank you.
Great. Leave it to the preacher to close. You're in trouble. Better cancel your lunch plan. No, just kidding. At any rate, so many of you know I served as the pastor at First Christian Church in the heart of Eugene for 29 years. And the year that I left in 2020, we had served about 22,000 people, mostly unhoused, in that past year. People just coming to a downtown church in desperate search for assistance of one kind or another. And I told the congregation when I left to devote full time to the nonprofit that I'd helped to establish a few years earlier, Square One Villages. I felt like that old story of the community organized around pulling drowning people out of the river until someone began to walk upstream and someone said, "Where are you going? We need you here." And that person replied, "I'm going upstream to figure out why people are falling into the river." And I tell them, that's my story. That's why I left the church, a work that I deeply loved, in order to go upstream to figure out why so many people are drowning. And that upstream work of Square One Villages is about to take off big time with the opening of our newest housing project, Peace Village. I see Dylan Lamar right over here. Wave, Dylan, our architect for that project. It's a very unique housing project, unlike any other rental project you've ever seen. It's a limited equity co-op where the residents actually own and operate their housing. And this is the model of housing that we are developing. This will be the largest of its kind in Oregon. We really believe that this work is going to make a significant difference. Well, for me, being involved in this work is about affirming the value of every individual. In religious terms, if you don't mind, to affirm them as a child of God. In secular terms, to affirm that every individual has a right to housing. And in the words of the Declaration of Independence from Thomas Jefferson, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Without housing, life is very difficult. Liberty is almost non-existent, and the pursuit of happiness is a distant memory. So I was more than glad to join this work of the Chamber to try to figure out as a community, how can we change this story? And what I've learned in this work that we particularly, not just at Square One Villages, but also in the downtown work at the church over these last 20 plus years of working in this area, almost 30 now. Over 30, is that there are three essential components to solving this problem. They are in this order: housing, housing, and housing. It really is. If I could wave a magic wand and eliminate all the addiction issues and the mental health problems and all of that, it would have a very minimal impact on the number of people that are unhoused. And this is the real paradox that it's taken me a long time to understand, that it's not about the individuals and fixing the individuals. It's about the systemic problem. It really is a case, it really is a case of musical chairs. Right? And you can help that slow individual get faster to beat out somebody else, but at the end of the day, you still don't have enough chairs. And that's really the issue. And so that's why we have to focus on the housing problem. So what I want people to go away with is a couple of resources. One, if you don't believe me, read this book. Homelessness is a housing problem. We were fortunate to talk with one of the authors in our coalition. But that really brings out the data to show why it is a housing issue. Secondly, Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond just blew me away. Brand new book, blew me away. And he really looks at the data in terms of why we have poverty is such a perplexing problem in this program, in this nation. And what he reveals is we give more away in terms of write-offs to the rich than we give in benefits to the poor. It really is quite astounding. And he says it would just take $177 billion to lift everyone out of poverty in this country. That's 1/5 of the amount of uncollected taxes. 1/5 of the amount of uncollected taxes. So the problem can be solved. And third, a study that just came out just recently, the Benoff Homelessness and Housing Institute, very easy to find. It was in the news at the time, but if you go to this URL, just homelessness.ucsf, that stands for University of California, San Francisco, .edu, you will find the Benoit study that addresses this problem. Benoist, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that name, but at any rate, really good data. So look at that and read that. Become a housing advocate. Talk to your elected officials. Support organizations like those that are here today. Share good info on social media. Consider joining a group like OregonHousingAlliance.org that lobbies on statewide issues, and you can find it just at OregonHousingAlliance.org. Because if we rely only on federal funding, guess what? We're going to be out of luck. You may have heard that we might not have a federal government after another week if it's going to shut down here, right? So we have to develop stronger sources of funding locally. Portland is a good model that has done this. So I want to just close with something I learned in high school in Albany, Oregon. Mr. Hogan was our band director, and he always taught us that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. It always made me nervous when he was looking at me playing the saxophone. But at any rate, our weakest link in our community is our affordable housing. We will never thrive as a community unless we solve this issue. When thousands of people in our community do not have the most basic of human necessities to survive, let alone to thrive as human beings. So join us in this effort because it is so critical for the benefit of the good of all. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. Thank you all so much for joining us. There's so many things that I hope you were able to take away from today, but a few points that I want to bring home. We talked about this being a yes and conversation, right? There is not one single solution. There is not a silver bullet to solve this crisis in our community. Housing without wraparound services and support for individuals who find themselves housed finally but have additional issues is not going to be the solution. But services without housing isn't going to work either. So we have to have both of these types of opportunities for people in our community. Accountability without a path to wellness is not the solution. Putting all of our efforts into wellness without holding folks accountable is not working for our community either. We have to be able to hold these things both in the conversation and pursue those types of solutions that really do find a balance between these different, often differing thoughts on how to move forward. There's a phrase, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the next best time is today. I feel the same way about this crisis. The best time to solve this was 20 years ago when we're putting in policies and procedures and financial decisions that got us to where we're at. But we're never going to get out of it if we don't start today trying to move the needle and change our situation. And frankly, my job at the Chamber is to be a chronic optimist. If I don't have an unwavering hope and optimism for this community, I'm not the right person for this job anymore. And I hope that you see that with our Chamber, is that we are pursuing an optimistic approach towards this. We do feel like there is a chance and an opportunity to change this, but it's only when we all come to the table and we're willing to put aside some of the feelings and the preconceived notions that we brought into the room, which is what has been the most, I think, hopeful experience that I've had, is that a lot of people coming to the table and they're putting their egos aside, they're putting aside the work that they've done for a lot of years that has made a big impact, to say, okay, but what can we do together to continue to make a greater impact? So thank you to everyone who's been involved in the conversation. And for those of you who are hopefully now wanting to get more involved, you'll reach out and we'll start to plug you into places. The beginning of November, we're going to host a community conversation where we dive a little bit deeper into these things and really map out what in each of those buckets that we talked about, housing and shelter and workforce and safety, what are measurable results that we want to try to accomplish? What are the timelines we can put on ourselves as a community, and how do we hold each other accountable to meeting those? And what are the barriers that we're going to have to come together to try to solve? It is a lot easier to just get mad and angry and point our fingers at folks and say, you need to fix this. But it's a lot more rewarding and successful if we say, we're going to do the deep and hard work to actually try to find the systematic solutions to try to make this a better community. So thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you being a part of the conversation.